So we've had 2 fantastic days of conference, all of us who've been here for 2 days, and there's lots of themes that John's just outlined that we've covered in many sessions over the course of the last 2 days. And I'm going to try and weave them in when I can, although I did prepare this before I turned up, obviously, so that might be a bit challenging. But I wanted to specifically talk about the idea of entrepreneurship that John has talked about just now and talks about at length in his book. He talks specifically about policy entrepreneurship, which I think is going to be vital for us. And I don't think it's necessarily down to one person or one group. It's probably going to be a question of deciding who does what aspect of that. But I'm thinking about Rob Lennox particularly, obviously, when I'm talking about this. But I'm also going to widen out the idea of entrepreneurship to include not just policy-driven innovation for our sector and archaeology, but other areas of practice too. I did think I might reflect on the idea of wicked problems and whether our wicked problems were actually unpredicted or whether they were entirely predictable. But I think that'd be slightly unfair because I think they are actually largely unpredicted, and we're in the situation not entirely of our own making, so we can leave that to one side for now. But I think in terms of policy, and we've heard lots in many sessions over the last couple of days about this, I think acknowledgement that's shared by many people in the room that our current policy in many ways holds us back from doing what we actually want to do. So by policy, I mean our old classics of preservation in situ, conservation principles, the way that we think about significance and value of archaeology as an asset in the ground or as a building or even a wider landscape context. And those policies hold us back from the public-facing work that we might want to do in its most meaningful sense. So I'm thinking in terms of shared design, targeted outcomes with people and planet in mind, and not just for the fabled record, as we heard in that astonishing slide that the CBA presented at the Trial and Error Survey on the opening session yesterday. I did speak just now in a wellbeing session about how great it would be if we could have planning conditions for archaeology that could focus on specific outcomes for communities. That was in terms of wellbeing, but I still think that we should aim for that as an aspiration in other types of outcomes as well. Archaeology as a vehicle for good, therefore, rather than just a data collection exercise, which is what actually it often is now. And I think some agencies, really what we're after as archaeologists, the numbers of young people leaving the sector is actually speeding up. They're leaving quicker than they've ever left before. And I feel this is partly due to how we treat them. They leave our university as clever, engaged, young, early career archaeologists, but don't actually get to contribute in any meaningful way. We just literally heard this in the Diggers Forum survey results in the wellbeing session earlier on. They were talking about social value in their own life and work, and social value is internal within an organisation as much as it is about what we're providing for the public around us and the communities that work and live around our sites. And we could do much better on providing social value for our own colleagues as a sector, I think. So we need to change how we design our processes and our project design specifically, and that comes through policy processes as well. The other issue that we need to think about in terms of policy is how we drive things forward. So innovation happens quite often in our sector. We have lots of small wins. Andrew and I were laughing earlier about if someone mentions framework archaeology, she might die on the spot. Well, I'm going to mention it. 25 years ago, exactly. It's an excellent example of a really, well, we all know what it is. It's an excellent example of a research-driven fieldwork project that hasn't really been followed up since, sadly, because of market forces, the failing financial stability of our sector generally, we've already heard about the York Archaeology engagement team. My own engagement team at Mola had a redundancy situation a couple of years ago. That's just 2 examples of many previous ones that we could mention. And we also know that unless we tell people, so not just us, but our clients, contractors, our own bosses and colleagues, to do things, they won't do them. So policy needs to follow case study guidance and innovation to get it embedded in practice going forward. So a practical suggestion for a small win. John talks about problems and solutions that are social, economic and environmental. And that, of course, is sustainable development as exactly defined in the good old NPPF. So we do already have policy that we could be leveraging to provide these things. And we also have mission-led government, as John alluded to earlier on his slide as well, with an aspiration to join up all this high-level thinking around growth, health, creating opportunity through education and skills, green energy, all of which archaeology can absolutely respond to. So we need to be specifically showing how we can respond to these through our work, not just through tender expectations and ISO 9000, etc., but also through supplying the metrics that these people need, through research input, working with the university sector, through social value, and widening participation, and through proving how valuable our work actually is. Moving on to commercial entrepreneurship, there's a quote from a colleague, Harold Fredheim, who's a colleague of John's as well at York. Development-led archaeology is closely connected to the construction, housing and infrastructure sectors, but this has always been something of an arranged and loveless marriage. Well, isn't that true? I think this is one of our super wicked problems, actually, that we are so intricately connected with the sector that we actively dislike, probably, and are quite frightened of. But time is running out, really, to solve this. We have no central authority to help us with this one, and the same actors causing the problem are required to help us solve it. Contemporary solutions appear less valuable to us. And really, if we think about it, in terms of the construction sector, the only really sustainable building is one that is already standing. And I worry a bit that we don't have a plan for a just transition for archaeology at all, in fact, and we have had previous papers at CIFA conferences about that, of course. One of the reasons why the commercial sector is so challenging at the moment is since Brexit, particularly, the UK and the London market, specifically in my experience, has become almost completely deregulated. So land is worth more now than ever before, and with that comes political capital and influence that people are buying. And combined with that, of course, we know our public sector, curatorial sector for archaeologists is massively underfunded. And so our regulatory bodies in finance and archaeology are struggling to keep up standards of compliance amongst developers. So real estate and land purchase has become lucrative and corrupt, even more so than it was before. And we are, of course, complicit in our involvement in that. We can pretend with our funny hair and our rainbow T-shirts. I'll take that. That we are doing good works for the archive because we're on the periphery of this, but actually we are entirely in the middle of it. You may not know, but the Qatari royal family, who are problematic politically for many of us, for many reasons, are the 10th largest landowner in the UK now, with a £40 billion portfolio in London alone. And I personally have worked on projects on behalf of them, ultimately, not as a direct client, of course, but ultimately. And Mola have worked on several of their sites. And if you happen to work for an organisation that's currently working or seeking work in Saudi Arabia, then you have your own moral maze that you're currently navigating, presumably, as well. But there are ways to wrestle good from this complicity that we all feel, this Faustian pact that we've all been engaged in for our entire careers. If, like me, you work for an organisation who does do this development funded work, then we need to be wringing every last penny out of these people to make sure they give something meaningful back. As I've already mentioned, health and planning are developer-funded archaeology's way in, I think. Both are context-specific, place-based issues that the government are desperate to solve. There's money behind them, and we can save the NHS money as well. Local situations and uncertainties, of course, but heavily data-led, and we are used to providing data to situations, so we can provide data for these problems as well. There is lots of political support already behind both those missions. John talks about, in his book, about the context of Mode 2 research, which is really interesting, and it's also really linked to Martin Carver back in 2011, what he wrote about the social contract, where research is generated and knowledge is created within broad social and economic contexts. So it happens where it's needed and where it's relevant, and it's practically useful. It's responding to a problem that people are having, or the planet is having, of course. Archaeology is more than knowledge creation. John does also say that we have an advantage, a superpower, in the form of a lens through which we can view these problems from the perspective both of deep time and of human experience. And we heard a lot about deep time and perspective in the Cultural Heritage Capital session this morning as well. And we're not the only ones who are thinking deeply about these issues in the construction sector more broadly and in the other professions that we work alongside. We do have allies, and I'm not picking the next slide up as a CIFA-specific critique. This is an organisational wide critique. There are many organisations that we struggle being members of or employees of. And I just wanted to bring up one example, really, as my last slide, which is the REBA Just Transition Lobby, who have done some really amazing work in the last couple of years. You probably know about this. But in the last couple of years, they've had a takeover of REBA. They've elected their youngest first worker president. So he's not a manager, he's a PC for equivalent, really, in the REBA hierarchies. He's the first black president. of REBA. And they're also seeking to unionise. They have major issues with early career contracts, low pay. Not all architects live in really nice houses and drive really nice cars, but all architects are part of the same system that we are, feeding the capitalist, concrete-loving, community-ignoring, green and heritage washing system that we are within and we would like to resist, but nevertheless we need to be contributing positively too. And on that note, I'm going to pass over to Sakshi Surana for the next bit of the session.